Welcome to the Aerospace Executive Podcast, featuring in-depth conversations with executives, leaders, influencers, and journalists in this dynamic, high-stakes industry. Hosted by Craig Picken, founder of Northstar Group, the boutique executive search firm for the aerospace industry. You'll learn how top aerospace executives are developing their people, competing for talent, overcoming challenges, and adjusting to industry trends to drive growth and profits. And now, let's join your host, Craig Picken.
Welcome to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I'm Craig Picken. Hey, today we've got Mark Amtower with us. Since 1985, Mark has been helping companies in all facets of selling to the government. He's the author of 7 books, to include one titled Selling to the Government. He's also known as the godfather of government marketing. On the side, he helps people build their brands and has written 7 other books to brand building and specialization, and lots of fun stuff to read. So, Mark, welcome. How are you today?
Craig, thank you for having me. I'm wonderful. It's a beautiful day to be alive.
So you are an expert. So you're really good at helping people build brands. How do they create a brand? How do they create a brand that is sort of parallel to what they want to be known for?
Well, the whole personal branding thing took off, and pretty much everybody thought they could do one. But when I'm working with an individual or a company, preferably a smaller company, that wants to develop an area of expertise, rule number one, step number one is defining what you're really good at. And then, figuring out, do people buy this? And if so, how? So how do you position yourself in this? And who else is doing it? Who's in the food chain? Where do you, realistically, where do you fit in that food chain? So you may be as good as everybody else, but if they're much better known than you, you've got to map out a strategy to start getting, a little further up that particular ladder.
What are you advising? How are you advising people? What's the best way to create that brand? Obviously you got to be good at what you do first. I think too many people are out there and they're trying to become Instagram models and all sorts of stuff on social media, and they it's like Kim Kardashian, the king of nothing, but we'll build a brand around it.
I'm still trying to figure out who the hell Kim Kardashian is and where he or she came from. I have no clue. I don't watch a lot of that part of television. So I watch some news and I watch Jeopardy. So.
But in your world, do you get a lot of people coming, hey, I'm not real sure what I'm good at, but I want to build a brand?
Usually they have a clue. Sometimes a small company will come and say, can you help us create a position in the market? So I go back again to step one. Where are you making money right now? If you're a small company, you should not be a generalist. If you want to be a generalist, let's take technology. You want to be a generalist in technology, be a home computer repair person. Everybody's got home computers. Most people don't know how to fix them. If you want to play in a bigger game, a B2B game, or in the business of government game, you really need to focus in on an area of expertise that you're currently good at or you're getting good at, and fine-tune that and bring that to the fore. So right now, all things cyber are hot. So I've been playing in the computer security arena since 1992 when I was on the board of the National Computer Security Association. But I wasn't on the board because I have any technical knowledge, because I don't. I was on the board to be the marketing guy. So I've been watching that field morph and continue morphing. So now you tell me into cyber, I'm going, what, AI, machine learning, CDM, intrusion, extrusion, what? And all of that. No, not all of that. Where are you making your money? I install, McAfee. Oh, gee, that's cool. go away. So helping them figure out what it is that they do well, that they can make money at, that they can develop a beachhead for, and then expand that beachhead.
Yeah, like doctors have figured this out long ago.
Yeah. I mean,
a guy who just works on hands. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and all I work on is hands.
Yep.
A brain surgeon. I work on these types of cases. But it's for a lot of people, becoming a specialist versus a generalist. It's the shiny objects. You see a lot of shiny objects, and you say, I can do that. And the reality of the matter is, if they would just focus on one small vertical and put their blinders onto everything else, they'd probably increase their revenue 2-3 times. Am I right?
Yes, but in the government market, there's only so much revenue to be made, like on an hourly basis, right? So you measure your progress by the number of contracts or on the task orders you get. You may only be making, $150, $175 an hour, but now you've got 30 butts in seat cranking that 175 versus you and your best friend who started the business with you 3 years ago, doing everything, including being the butts in seats.
So when people are going to the DoD or some of the agencies and they're saying what they do well, how do they break out in their specialty?
Well,
do they have to partner with General Dynamics or Rockwell Collins or Raytheon
partnering with a major prime like that is probably the wrong way to look at it. You're not partnering with them. You are going to sub to them. So subcontracting is certainly a way to go. Teaming with other smalls to build a past performance record is a way to go. Going after little tiny pieces of work, if you can find them, is a way to go. But you have to figure out how the agency you are targeting actually places those task orders out. So it may be an agency-specific contract. It may be a government-wide contract, an IDIQ or a MAC, multiple award contract. So you need access not only to the customers, you need access to the contracts that they're buying off. And again, that's probably going to end up being some sort of subcontracting teaming agreement.
Where's the best way to find those opportunities? And what's the best way to tell the world that, hey, I'm the one?
Well, there's paid services like Bloomberg Government and GovWin from Deltek. You can go to the Federal Procurement Data System, FPDS.gov or USAspending.gov, and do research there. Primarily, again, focusing on a particular type of service or product, a specific agency, and seeing, when they've bought this, which agencies have purchased this. If a particular contract is coming up for renewal soon, how are you getting in the queue to actually bid on that contract? So your research beforehand is absolutely critical. And for smaller companies, again, focus on what you do and target, a max of 3 agencies, preferably 2. You're not going to, quote, sell to the government. You're going to sell to a very particular audience in that government. And trying to cover, the whole ball of wax with, a 5 or 10 man team just isn't going to happen. So you have to keep in mind that this is a very heavy relationship-driven market. So it's relationships between you and the feds, you and the primes, you and your teaming partners, you and the media, you and capital. So, if you win something, do you have the funds to produce? So if you win a piece of business that requires 20 people with these types of certifications, number one, do you have access to them? Number two, are you ready to pay them and bring them on board? And are they available? So all of these things have to be queued up ahead of time. And it's not an easy game to play.
Are companies positioning themselves well? I mean, you work with you work with a lot of companies. You help them with their marketing. You help individuals. You build their own brand. What are the biggest mistakes you're seeing?
Uh, the first biggest mistake is not focusing on one or two agencies as opposed to going after, anything they see on FedBizOps, FBO.gov. So FBO.gov puts out, all of the known bids. Agencies are supposed to put them through there. And, regardless of the agency and regardless of any relationships, you're just bidding on pretty much everything, throwing mud against the wall, hoping something sticks. That rarely works. So again, focusing on a particular agency and going after that. Mistake number two, does your website reflect anything to do with government business? Does it display the area of expertise that you're bringing to the market? Does it explain in both technical terms and layman terms the reason that government not only should be buying from you, but showing that you actually have very deep knowledge in this area? So if you're not sharing content, if you're not building a reputation around a particular skill, like continuing diagnostics and mitigation, you're not going to get anywhere.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny. I was telling you a story before we started recording. A company a couple of years ago, they hired a VP of sales, government sales and marketing, and he flat out told them, "Hey, look, it's a year, 18 months before you're going to start to see any results, if not more." And their answer was, "Yeah, but we need stuff now." You want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, what's realistic? Come on, we got a lot of people. We got a lot of people that listen to this. They're selling to they're taking on military contracts, or they want to take on more DoD Air Force contracts, and tell you Marine Corps, whatever. How realistic? I mean, what's the expectations they should be setting for themselves?
If you're new to the market and you do everything right, a minimum of 18 months commitment before you see money. Okay, if you're not willing to play that game, don't even bother coming in. So 18 to 24 months for money. You're spending money during that process on educating yourself. The bid and proposal arena is not free. So when you see these opportunities, you're committing time and resources to going after them. If you do not have the right team in place in-house to bid on federal work, then you hire hired guns. There's a lot of excellent proposal people out there as consultants, and there are some questionable people out there. So, vet your outside sources and be prepared for the long game. Nobody makes quick hits here. It just doesn't happen. If the agency doesn't know you, they are going to back burner whatever you send in until the window closes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for the faint of heart. I remember when I was at Gulfstream, and we were bidding on the Gulfstream 5, aka Air Force C-37 contract, which we ended up winning. But I think we probably had $1 million and a half just into that bid process.
Oh yeah,
with no guarantee you're going to win it.
Yeah, and for small companies, you're probably not going to spend $1 million to $1.5 million. But when you factor in the size of that contract, you are talking probably billions of dollars. So when you're going after a vehicle that big and spending, $1.5 million on the B&P process, that's not unusual. I've seen companies spend more and not win. And in smaller scenarios, though, you've got to be prepared to spend not insignificant money for a small company to go after these things. And a win rate of 30% is not bad.
Wow. I mean, so, like I said, so it's not for the faint of heart.
No, no.
You're at risk for a lot of stuff.
If you are into instant gratification, go away.
What about on a personal front? So you're helping executives out there, and you build their personal brands too, outside of dealing with the government.
Yeah,
Are they doing a good job? Are people in general doing a pretty good job with their personal branding, or is the whole world, is half the world clueless?
From my perspective, I'd say about 5 to 10% of the people are doing an adequate job. 3 to 4% are doing a great job, and pretty much everybody else sucks.
What do they need to be doing? Without giving up your recipe, what do they? What's the biggest mistake you see?
The biggest mistake is I me throughout. If you've done things, simply explain. Tell your story. How did you get from point A to point B? Point A is where you enter your career. Point B is where you are right now. So there's got to be some stories in between there that should illustrate areas of expertise that it's taken, which may include, mentors. But there is no such thing as a self-made person. Everybody has mentors. So tell your story, tell it well. Don't seem to be in love with yourself. I mean, I think we all should love ourselves, but that should not be the point of the story.
Where do they? I mean, yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's the one thing that we used to always teach, or when I was leading a sales team, it was, don't start the email with I. It's about the other guy.
Yeah, when you're telling a story, you're telling it to someone who you want to do business with, right?
Yep.
So what you're trying to do is frame their issues around your experiences and position yourself as someone who can help them, regardless of the market you're in. You're someone or some company that can help them get out of the doldrums they find themselves into that top tier.
See, you've written 7 books, and we talked about we talked about the first one a little bit, selling to the government. But some of the other books you've written are pretty cool. Talk about them a little bit.
3 of them are political, and they were. In a sense, they were joke books. They were the 2010, 2014, and 2016 voters' guide, the unofficial voters' guide to those particular elections. After the intro, and the subtitle was "Everything Politicians Know About What You Want." And after the introduction, each one's 100 blank pages. So I'm not a huge fan of politicians, regardless of which side of the fence they sit on.
An easy read.
Yeah, pretty easy read, but something people can relate to pretty quick. Right. So my first book was Government Marketing Best Practices, self-published, sold 9,000 copies, which is pretty good for a self-published book.
Yep.
And it was popular enough that the Veterans Administration Small Business Office bought it from me in cases by the hundreds. So they would give it out at all their small business conferences. I love when stuff like that happens.
Absolutely. 9,000 books to the right people.
Yeah.
Nobody said you had to sell 1 million. 9,000 books given to the right people is a yeah.
Yeah. Go back to that book. Government Marketing Best. I was already an established figure in the government market when this came out in 2005. That book took me to a new level because now I was the guy that wrote the book. So that book became my best business card.
Gotcha.
Okay. Books for most of us aren't profit centers. They are vehicles to position yourselves as an expert in a particular niche. So the next book came from a speech I did at a business conference I spoke at every year They asked me to do the lunch speech, but they asked me not to talk about government. So I wrote a speech called Amtower's Laws of Survival and Success. And it was a 20-minute lunch speech. And two of my personal advisors were at that conference, and both of them came up afterwards and said, this should be your next book. And I'm thinking, it was a 20-minute speech. It's going to be a short book. But I wrote a book from that called Why Epiphanies Never Occur to Couch Potatoes. So, and you and I were discussing this. You know, most people say they have rules that they live by. They live by their own rules. Well, I challenge people who tell me that to tell me what they are. Have you written them down? If you haven't written them down, they are malleable. They aren't rules. They're foyers for situational ethics.
They're suggestions they're suggestions you make to yourself.
Yeah, they're flexible white lines on the side of the road, right? If you want to drive down the shoulder, you can go right ahead.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And then a friend of mine, very well-known business author, David Meerman Scott, was in a meeting with John Wiley and Sons, his publisher, and they happened to mention to him that they wanted a book on the government market. And David said, well, then get Amtower to write one. So Wiley brought me on to write Selling to the Government, which is, you know, it's great to have a major business publisher ask you. I didn't even have to submit, you know, go through their regular process. They just called and said, send us an outline, and they sent me a check. I like when that happens too.
Checks are nice. So what? So who's reading Selling to the Government? I mean, that sounds like. Is that something that every big defense contractor or every big government contractor has a copy of on their shelf, or is it
Awesome.
Small businesses, or a little bit of everybody?
Pretty much everybody in between. You know, when I'm in CEOs' offices, I'm always thrilled to see it on the bookshelf, but I'm always tempted to ask if they actually read it.
And how many have?
About half.
There you go. But what's the difference? I mean, like, what's the difference? Selling to the government, who's looking at your website, seeing if you're credible, seeing if you can deliver at a decent price.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it really that much different than selling to corporate America or selling to Joe and John Smith?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuances in the market, and not the least of which is termination for convenience, which means the government can end your contract for any reason they want and not tell you what the reason is at any time. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. During the bidding process, if you submit a proposal that doesn't fit the original parameters of the proposal, including type size, font, and length, you're out. There's just a ton of different little nitty things that play here. And then there's the ethical side, things that you can do for business that you can't do for government. You can't take them to dinner. You can't take them golfing. You can't take them to your favorite resort. You can't buy them meals at a conference. So there's a lot of smaller things that you have to take into consideration when you're doing business with the government.
So let's kind of the last topic that we talked about, so how do people go out, win bigger contracts, make their businesses better, create their brands?
Again, especially for smaller companies, focus on what you do well, figure out which agencies are your best target, research those agencies, make sure your website reflects some knowledge of doing business with the government, that it's not generic B2B. if the agency that you're doing business with is hosting industry days or any other meetings where they're talking about upcoming contractual vehicles, you go to those. You do your best to find the people who are responsible for these things. I leverage LinkedIn heavily for my clients that way because there's 2.2 million feds on LinkedIn representing literally every agency out there, including the intelligence community. So LinkedIn is a big part of that. If you're new to the market, setting up business with the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, doing your research before you go in, knowing what you do, how that fits with that particular agency, and if you can, which contracts it might fit on. Determine whether or not you're going to be a prime sub or a team member. If you're really small, you really should start off as a subcontractor, and getting those gigs isn't easy either. On the proposal side, if you do not have the talent in-house, here's that expense again. You got to bring somebody in, a hired gun to help you through that process. And that's with each proposal that you're going after. But once you develop, once you win a little bit of business, take that as a beachhead in a particular agency and develop more relationships there. Look for other work that you can do for them there. But if they like you, that's your best avenue to grow your business. Take that beachhead. And again, it's a relationship-driven market. So develop relationships within that agency. And it doesn't matter, if you're in Washington, D.C. or in Tulsa or in, Montana. There's federal activity everywhere in the country. So proximity could help, as long as what you're near buys what you do.
Gotcha. So let's wrap it up with this. You talked about LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
How important is LinkedIn? You use it to promote your business. We've got hundreds of mid-career executives out there. How important is LinkedIn to their success in business?
Well, if you've been in business any length of time, hopefully you've developed some areas of expertise. So figure out what those are, the value that they bring to your company, and the value they could bring to any future employee. And think of LinkedIn as your best billboard out there for telling the world what you're good at, why you're good at it, and why people should hire you. It's not a resume dump, but again, you're telling a story here. So probably the most underutilized portion of LinkedIn is that summary feature where you have 2,000 characters to start telling your story. So I've been on LinkedIn for over 15 years now. I joined February 11, 2004. And like everybody else, I sat there for a while trying to figure out what the heck I was doing. But admittedly, back then there were much fewer people on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I joined before there was 250,000 people on LinkedIn. But right now, it is where everybody goes to vet the people that they're going to meet, that they want to meet, or they want to hire. So if you're not presenting yourself extremely well from the get-go, including that summary area, you're wasting valuable opportunity.
Yep. I agree. If you're not on LinkedIn, you're not really. Yeah, I was telling this to my wife. Like, if you're not on LinkedIn, if you're in business and you're not in LinkedIn, or you got a poor profile, you're irrelevant. You're starting from a point of irrelevancy.
Yeah, you don't exist. You're Ralph Ellison's invisible man. But again, being on LinkedIn with a bad profile is probably worse than not being on LinkedIn at all, because now you look like an idiot as opposed to being just invisible. So not finding people on LinkedIn is rare. finding them on LinkedIn with, various portions of their resume, filling in various slots is the norm. And when you asked earlier, and I forget whether it was part of the interview or before, what percentages of executives present themselves well, most just don't. And that's mid-level as well as high level. If you're a grunt in a corporation, but you're a good grunt doing good work, start to highlight that area of expertise that you're bringing. It can be financial, some sort of back office function, it can be business development, sales, marketing. At the beginning and end of each day, I'm a marketing guy. That's all I am. But I'm one of the most known people in the government market. That's weird.
It's a nice place to be, right?
It is, but it's not easy, and it carries a lot of responsibility. So I can't take cheap shots in public.
Right.
I'm tempted all the time, but my mantra is add value everywhere you go. So when I comment on something, I'm going to do it only if I can add value. If I'm going to write an article, it's going to be only if it adds value to the market. When I bring people onto my radio show, it's only to add value to the market. So, and for individuals out there at any point in their career, that's not a bad mantra to follow.
I think if you're on social media today, many of people's careers and lives have been wrecked by what they post on social media. And it's a great thing to remember. I said, if you don't add value to a conversation and you're just taking a cheap shot, it's best to hit the delete key before you hit enter.
Right. So you're in the aerospace industry. I did some consulting for about a year with a company called the Logistics Management Institute. These are thought leaders in 12 stovepipes that serve the Defense Department, the intelligence community, and the Department of Energy. So I coached these brainiacs on using LinkedIn, and I found people who were in areas of expertise that I had no clue existed, one of which is readiness-based sparing, which means finding the OEM manufactured part at the right time and having it at the depot where you need it. So if your F-16 is missing something, your supply chain guys should know exactly where it is and how to get it. So the guy that I worked with on this, Dave Peterson, who built a wonderful LinkedIn profile around readiness-based sparing, he's the go-to guy in this area. So, it doesn't matter how narrow your niche is, how esoteric it is. Chris Anderson wrote that book about 15 years ago, I guess, called The Long Tail, which was kind of an introduction to the world, to the web, and how you could use the web to find the most esoteric things imaginable. Like-minded people who liked left-handed Lithuanian, line dancers. It doesn't matter what the area is, you can find people this way. LinkedIn has done that for business, and LinkedIn has also, reduced that 6 degrees of separation down to 3 degrees. So if you leverage it properly, you can get in front of the right people with the right message. When they look at your profile, they're going to think, how the heck did I not know who this person was to begin with?
It's amazing. I mean, look, the whole thing to me is amazing. You just think about social media, the ability to build your brand on social media. But if you do it in a positive way, I think the same thing is, I do it the same way as you. I put a lot of stuff out there. But at the end of the day, you just can't take cheap shots at people. There's no value in there's no value in.
No, it only.
It's just dumb. It's just dumb. It just makes you look like an idiot.
It only reflects back on you.
Absolutely.
So
how do people get a hold of you?
You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily. You can find me at federaldirect.net, and or you can send an email to markamtower@gmail.com.
Mark, thanks for coming on today. It was great meeting you. Great conversation.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. Had a good time.